Hey, my name is Nelson Taylor. I'm a broker here at Sotheby's International Realty.
Hi, I'm Tim Lynch. I'm a broker here at Sotheby's International Realty. The housing market in Olympia.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about real estate investing, it's, do I invest in real estate or sports parks? I'd argue the latter there.
Yeah, there you go.
Griffey rookie cards, they're just pretty stale. It's insane.
That's crazy.
Absolutely insane.
Crazy.
Nelson and Tim, what are contingencies and what ones do I need?
That's a great question.
Yeah. Are we talking about like financing and like all the contingency addendums, or did we just want to talk about the home sale contingency of if I'm a buyer and I need to sell my home in order to buy again? Is that?
I think we should talk about some of the biggest or most commonly seen contingencies in a purchase and sale agreement. Like if you're a buyer and you've never bought a house before, what do you need in your offer to be somewhat protected, fully protected, kind of like that?
Okay. Well, then the home inspection and financing really are the top two that you see in pretty much every offer. You go under contract and your first thing you have done is your home inspection. Got to make sure you get into the crawl space, get into the attic, test all the systems and appliances to, make sure you're not buying a lemon.
This is true.
Yeah.
Yes, I would say for sure home inspection and financing are definitely the two biggest.
Yeah.
And then depending upon where you're at, right, like septic inspection
Yeah.
and pumping, huge. Well addendum, well inspection, huge. But really like I was thinking about this a little bit, like my general thought of like if I had to explain what contingencies do for a buyer, it's like this umbrella opportunity for a buyer to observe the entire health of a property and the home to make sure throughout the contract period it's something they actually want to close on.
Right.
And like using those contingencies to figure that stuff out, but throughout that process, if you see things that are red flags or that a seller is not willing to negotiate on, it gives that buyer the opportunity to terminate the contract, get their earnest money back, and then continue that journey forward to find the right property. So
yeah, they're definitely major protections for that buyer to ensure they're buying the right property. Mm-hmm. The house, the home is in the right condition for them to move forward with their life in this new home.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So along those lines is, just as important as these contingencies are, let's just again use the home inspection, for example, is following that timeline. So if you have 5 business days to conduct your home inspection, you got to make sure within those 5 days, not only do you have the inspection, you review the report, you have conversations with your realtor and the inspector about, hey, do I need any additional inspections? Do I need to trigger that additional inspection clause here in this inspection contingency to now get that roofer or that electrician or whatever that specialty trade is out to the house to investigate a specific issue that we uncovered during the general home inspection.
Right.
Yeah.
So essentially,
We have a hand raise.
we got a hand raise.
Or a finger.
Question. Let's whittle it down a little bit more.
Okay.
Let's specifically go off the home inspection contingency that you guys have been talking about. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? Does that mean the sale or the purchase of this home that I'm trying to buy or sell is relying on something specific happening in an inspection, meaning it's going to pass, right? Is that what that means?
Yeah.
Like, can you break down what is a contingency? What does that mean for someone who's never gone through this process before?
It's a great question.
Yeah, Nelson.
Yeah.
The floor is yours.
Yes, essentially, in a nutshell, the inspection contingency is something that a buyer can pass or fail, right? But there are nuances to that. So let's say I'm buying this house across the street, my realtor and I find the inspector, inspection's performed, we have a 90-page inspection with a bunch of photos, which is what you want to see. You kind of don't want to see ones that don't have a bunch of photos, right? But you want to see the things that are good and bad. From that inspection, I can go, okay, the house looks wonderful. There's really nothing I want to ask for. I don't want to try and maybe negotiate on purchase price or a credit or a fix or modification. So I'm going to pass this inspection contingency and move forward with the real estate transaction. Or, and I know we've had this with clients before, where we negotiate or try and work things out based off of what we do find on those inspection contingencies. And I know you've seen quite a few where things are not great.
Yeah, and so that home inspection contingency is not just a pass or a fail opportunity for the buyer. It also gives that buyer that opportunity of saying, hey, I love this house. I want to continue forward with closing on this home. However, these few issues came up during the home inspection, and now we have this opportunity to renegotiate with the seller our contract that says, seller, I want to continue down this path of this purchase, but I'm going to need X, Y, and Z repaired in order for me to continue. Or rather than repairs, I want X dollars off of the purchase price, and I'll take care of all repairs later after closing. It just gives that buyer that opportunity to continue with the home purchase if they desire, and get those repairs or modifications done along the way to protect them and their future asset of home.
Yeah, it's kind of a case-by-case basis. Like, a lot of people ask me, well, is it better to try and, use an inspection response to come off the purchase price, or to have things fixed by the seller, or to ask for a credit? And I don't think there's a right or wrong way to go about that. I think it's dependent upon each buyer's situation and what's more impactful for them. So, personally, I think it's nice to have a choice if things are getting fixed of who's doing the work. Not to say a seller wouldn't choose somebody wonderful and awesome, but as a buyer, Tim, like if you're buying a property, I think you would prefer to choose the person that's going to come out, work on the roof or the furnace or whatever needs adjustment. And sometimes a credit, if you ask for a credit from your inspection response, is a nice way to save some money and be able to, get somebody in after the house closes to get that work done.
Right. And two, on your inspection, if you would like to, on the buyer, to control who does the work, you can request that of the seller. Hey, seller, hire contractor X to complete this repair prior to closing. So that gives them the opportunity of selecting the person that does it, and then also having the work done prior to closing. Because maybe it's an appraisal issue. Maybe it's a repair that needs to be done in order for the appraiser to now come out, not only give value to the home that's appropriate, but also condition that's appropriate. So sometimes, and again, like you mentioned, it's all case by case. Every house is different. Every buyer and seller are different. But those are all kind of things that, as we work together with our clients through this journey of helping educate them, helping them understand this isn't a cut and dry transaction.
Right.
It flows constantly, and we are here to help you along that way to say, here's 3 or 4 options to solve this problem, and what would you like to do, buyer? And we can go back to the seller and request that from them, because we're following our timelines.
Right.
We're within this time period to conduct these inspections and these negotiations.
Right. I like using analogies. An inspector and an inspection is kind of like going to the doctor. Like, you have your, general practitioner. Yeah. Right. So like, I go to the doctor, I'm like, okay, like, get my physical done. Like, that's kind of the home inspection. They break you down X, Y, Z. Your doctor might say, okay, like, I think you need to see what are the eye doctors called?
Eye doctor?
Optometrist?
Ophthalmologist?
All the names I can't pronounce. You got to go see that person. So, like, that would be an inspector.
Real estate, bro.
Dude, I'm not a doctor. Let's make that very clear. An inspector might be like, okay, your electrical system doesn't look awesome. Maybe you got some knob and tube in there. Maybe things are not wired correctly.
Got that Zinsco panel.
I'm going to recommend that you get a professional electrician to come out and take a look. So that's the home inspection. Let's get the full scope. And then if there are subsects of that inspection that need additional, touch points, that's when we have those additional days built in, which hopefully, they have a good amount of time in there, because sometimes it can be hard to get people to come in and get stuff done in a timely manner. So to me, that's an inspection. It's your general overview. You use that information to help accomplish the goals that you have as a buyer, and then continue through that contract period. But it's as a buyer, it's essentially kind of like a get out of jail free card.
Oh yeah,
like
absolutely.
You can terminate based off of that inspection, or don't even get one done.
Don't even have to do it
for any reason. Yeah. Without explanation. And I think that's important to understand too from a seller's side. Like, hey, what does the inspection mean for the buyer? Yeah. And what can they do with that affects my property and how I sell this property, and how long they have to think about if this is really the one they want or not. So it goes both ways.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly to that. I have that conversation with the buyer saying, hey, this is our get out of jail free time. Seller knows that as well, so they want that inspection contingency to be narrowed in, honed in, and be done as quick as possible. So is 5 business days going to be enough for us to get our inspector out? Well, hey, let's just pick up a phone call, pick up the phone, call our inspector and say, when can you come out? Can you meet this timeline that I'm about to commit myself to? Can you meet it, home inspector? Because if you can't, we're going to either have to find another inspector before we go under contract or potentially ask for additional time before we go under contract with the seller. We need to have all this information in our bag before we can make this offer with the seller.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot to be done.
What are your thoughts on seller procured inspections?
I mean, it's good information to have as a buyer, but I'm still going to get one as a buyer.
Sure.
Because did the seller give me all 90 pages of that report?
Sure.
Or just the first 35 that looked nice? So, or did they hire, I don't know, home inspector A that they hired.
Right.
We've got our team that we like to use. You know, buyer, this is great information for us, but highly recommend still getting your own inspection because we weren't here during that home inspection period. When that home inspector was in the house, what kind of conversations did they have with the seller to say, hey, this might be an issue. I'll leave it off on my report because I'm doing this for you, but you know, you just don't know.
Right. And that's such a good point. It's like
trust but verify, right?
I'll have clients that are like, do I need to be there for the home inspection? And I'm like, ideally, yes. Like, I will be there. You're there. We're there to watch it happen and talk to the inspectors, but I'm not the one that's going to be living in the house.
Yep.
And, you know, on a day-by-day basis, tinkering with the systems and understanding how things work, I'm not buying it. But as the buyer, to hear from the inspector's mouth directly, where they're showing you how to do different things and pointing these things out, because sometimes, you know, you get the reports and things might seem super drastic, but in actuality, they're not.
Yeah.
And that's that in-person conversation with the inspector where it's like, hey, just look out for this down the road. Let's monitor this. Or no, this is a safety hazard. This is an issue. This needs to get fixed now. So being present, I think, is super important.
Huge. I always want to see a buyer there at least for a couple hours or maybe even just 1 hour. Just be there for some period of time to where maybe you've showed up an hour late. I've been there for a little while, but I've made a couple notes to say, okay, when the buyer comes in, I want the home inspector to speak directly to the buyer about this that they found.
Right.
Because I don't want to be that person that maybe I said it incorrectly or you didn't have all the information because I didn't go in the crawl space. I didn't go in the attic, but I saw the pictures and we had a conversation. I want that same conversation to be had with the buyer.
So you're telling me that you're not getting geared up and going into the crawl space?
I can tell you, no, I am not.
It's respectable. It's kind of scary down there sometimes.
There's spiders and mice. There's all kinds of stuff.
You can find some weird stuff down there.
Oh, man.
Yeah. On the flip side, we're talking about this in the sense of, you know, like houses that might be sitting on the market for a little bit, or, you know, you write an offer on a property and it has no other offers. On the flip, in a competitive market with, you know, we'll keep the home inspection contingency going. You know this, sellers want to see the winning offer has the least amount of contingencies.
Yeah. We've
kind of established that contingencies are there to help protect the buyer and ensure that they can, you know, work through these steps appropriately and figure out that this is the home they want. If you're writing an offer on a house, or a buyer's writing an offer on a house that they're expecting 6 or 7 and it's competitive, how are you going about dealing with that? How are you talking to them about, okay, we have these things, but, you know, if you want to win, I don't know.
Best case scenario, if it's even possible, because again, if it's this competitive, maybe there's showings lined up back to back to back to back, and we don't have a particular window. But ideally, you'd be able to find an hour or two to where you can do what's called a pre-inspection, right? You can get your home inspector there before you write up an offer. You inspect the house, so that way you have all your information when you go and write your offer. You can say, okay, seller, here's my offer. I am now waiving my inspection contingency. My get out of jail free card has been waived because I've already conducted this inspection.
Right.
I already like what I have found in the house. Hard to do because not every seller is going to allow you to block off an hour or 2 hour window of time and prevent other showings from occurring. But that is a tool that we could use in this process.
Yeah, I read an article a couple of years ago It was like millennial home buyers' biggest regrets when buying a house. And this was when, it was COVID and things were crazy and, people are waiving inspections and literally every contingency. And essentially, just side story, there was a person in Seattle, they were competing on this property and they offered, some crazy offer. Everybody's offering crazy offers. They also included their Tesla in the offer. Like, hey, we'll buy your house, we'll go X amount over, no contingencies, and you can have our Tesla. That they didn't end up winning, but I'm like, that's crazy. Just back in the day.
Those were some times.
Those were some times. Yes, but yeah, with to that point, I mean, don't buy a house without an inspection. Like truly. So
not even brand new construction.
That was the point of the
Still
article.
inspect brand new.
Yeah, that was the point of the article. Biggest regrets was folks were buying homes without looking at a seller procured inspection. Not doing a buyer pre-inspection, and then obviously not doing theirs because the offer was accepted without one.
Mm-hmm.
And you get into that property, and in the first 6 months, it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that we had this massive leak, in the floor, and that cost $20,000 to fix, and I didn't know about it.
First major rainstorm. Now I need a sub pump in my crawl space. What's a sub pump?
What? Yeah. What? What is this for? So, if you're in a situation where it is competitive, and the buyer does feel comfortable to kind of take that risk to understand that they're submitting an offer without an inspection contingency, you got to do one of two things, and one is that buyer procure pre-inspection, or hopefully the seller understands their property is super desirable and it's going to get competitive, and they provide one. Hopefully it's good, right? I mean, we've seen hundreds and hundreds, so you can kind of piece together what's a pretty solid report and what might be missing some pictures and some pages. You have a question?
No, I mean...
I thought I saw a finger stick
To Taylor in the back, yes?
Yes, in the back, Taylor?
Well, I will pose another question about contingencies.
All right.
Okay.
Tell us, you mentioned financing contingencies, assuming that means there's more than one kind. Can you talk about those?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's really more than one kind. You just have your financing contingency, but on that singular contingency, there's several different financing options. So you identify, I'm going to get a conventional loan, I'm going to get a VA loan, FHA loan. You're identifying on this singular contingency form what type of financing you're going to be getting and how much your down payment is going to be on this. So you're demonstrating to the seller, hey seller, this is the financing type I'm going to be getting. This is the down payment I'm putting down on this home, or zero in the case of VA loans and other loan types out there. Maybe it's zero. But you're identifying to the seller, I will be obtaining financing through this, and this financing contingency is going to protect me on a couple different levels. Mm-hmm. One, there's going to be an appraisal.
Huge.
So that's going to be protecting me, the buyer, saying, our contract is for X, but the appraiser ultimately also needs to come in and evaluate the property and speak to whether or not they feel that value is appropriate. Mm-hmm. And if not, our contingency protects us to now we have several options along the way to renegotiate the purchase price. Or two, the other big protection in there is maybe I lost my job 1 week before closing. Appraisal's done, inspection's done, mm-hmm. everything is done. But I just lost my job. And so now when I go to get through final underwriting, I'm no longer approved for my loan. Well, that'll hurt, and that will not be, a pleasurable experience for the buyer, but their earnest money is still protected in that contingency still protected them financially, and so they can terminate the contract due to that and get their earnest money back. But
right.
Never a fun time to see that, but again, that's the real importance of having contingencies in place.
How long does that financing contingency last?
Well, the default time is 21 days from mutual acceptance. That's a line that can be negotiated up front through your initial offer and your initial negotiations, but typically it's 21 days. And within those 21 days, you'll know whether or not you're approved, and if on day 22, if the seller sends you the document
right.
to waive that contingency or not, which doesn't usually happen. So if they don't send you that, it's until closing. But the seller needs to send you a form after day 21 to terminate.
Have you had that happen on any one of your contracts?
I haven't had a seller send that over before yet.
I've had it once, and this situation makes sense. It was a buyer that, they entered the contract with, their financing contingency, their down payment amount, because they were going with a lender. And then this was an elongated close. It was, 45, 50 days. After like 2 weeks, the buyer said, we're actually going to purchase with cash. They still had their financing contingency, but in this case, after 21 days, the listing agent asked or requested, via the seller, to waive that contingency. That's the only time I've had it happen. In that case, it does make a lot of sense because it's cash, so there's no lender involved in this process. With a finance purchase, I've never had that 22, what is it, AR, I think, sent over.
I think so. I forget exactly which one it was.
I haven't had that sent over yet.
Intentionally didn't mention what number it was.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
But it's interesting because usually, the contract period's about 30 days.
Yeah.
Right? So you're 9 days away from closing after that 21st day. The buyer has 3 days to respond to that notice to waive financing. So now we're what?
24.
24, so we're 6 days out. And then if they don't waive the financing, well, is the seller going to terminate the contract after 26 days with closing?
It's extremely rare
Yeah.
that someone would lose financing right before closing. But again, just the point being, we want to protect, we want to educate our buyers with what is there in place for them. And that's a big one. I have had a situation where we almost lost financing because my buyer went and bought another house in California, co-signed. That was fun.
Cool.
But we were able to work through that.
Yeah.
It's totally a different story, but on the topics of losing financing at the last minute, that almost happened. But so that contingency is really, really important, and probably secondary to the home inspection, septic inspection, well inspection, those various inspection contingencies. That financing one is definitely huge.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, again, the home inspection and financing, you see it most often, kind of similar to what we were talking about when we were talking about in a competitive situation, right? Like you're really probably not going to have your inspection, maybe. Really probably not going to have financing. So I would always recommend to buyers, if they feel comfortable submitting that offer, trying to be competitive to get it accepted, to not have financing, let's make sure you're fully pre-underwritten by your lender. So
because
you're vetted. You know what you can and can't do.
Yeah, and not including that financing addendum doesn't say you can't get financing.
For sure.
You can still, as a buyer, get your financing. It's just saying, hey, seller, I'm not basing this transaction, closing of this transaction, based upon me obtaining financing.
For sure.
I'm going to get financing, but if I lose my job or something arises with my financing, my earnest money is at risk.
Right.
So it's not foregoing your complete ability to get it.
Right, right. And I think in that financing contingency, you talked about it, which was, that subsection that talks about appraisal less than sales price. We do have a separate addendum that just focuses on that appraisal piece. So I've done this multiple times with my clients where they're in somewhat of a competitive situation. We have the pre-inspection done, and they're vetted to a T by the lender. They feel comfortable. Their jobs are secure, so they say, yeah, we'll waive that piece. But they're escalating, a good amount over purchase price.
Yeah.
And then in that, right, we're looking at comparable sales. So we're helping our buyers understand, okay, we have a list price, which doesn't really mean anything. It's what the seller's asking for.
Yeah.
And we go look at the market and say, okay, we have these actives, these pendings, these solds. Let's break this down. Okay, you're offering $150,000 over this list price. Does that actually make sense?
Yeah.
Because if you don't include that appraisal addendum separate from the financing, and that purchase price or appraisal price is X amount lower than what you said you would buy it at, the buyer's on the hook to make up that difference. There's nothing protecting them, and if they can't and they terminate, it's outside of their contractual abilities, and earnest money could be at risk. So I think it's important to understand that you can still try and work some things in, even if you're trying to be competitive and take a shot at doing the best you can. But those appraisals, that they can get scary sometimes for buyers when they see, okay, I am escalating, and I don't have anything to negotiate if it comes in low. So you got to get dialed in on the data for sure.
Yeah.
But appraisals are subjective, so that's also hard.
Very.
It's not a science.
Nope.
you know?
There's nothing that says, oh, I have a heat pump and this comparable just has a furnace. There's no metric that says a heat pump is worth X dollars, 5,000, 2,000, whatever the number is. I've seen appraisals come in where they make adjustments, and each appraiser is extremely different about what they'll adjust and how much they'll credit values for heat pumps versus non-heat pumps.
Well, I'm looking at, townhomes in Ballard right now, and the subject property doesn't have a garage, but, some of the comps do, and it's like, well, what's a garage worth in this city, in this specific neighborhood? It's challenging, and again, that's the subjective opinion. Someone might say, oh, it's that's a $30,000 difference to have a garage versus not. Someone might say 15. Like, who's right?
Yeah,
I don't know. No idea.
Me neither.
So we've talked about all the different contingencies, but just to make sure we're really turning every stone on this topic, let's just specifically define what it means to buy a home with no contingencies. You're just buying the home as is, taking it for what it is. Is that what that means?
No contingencies at all. Yeah, you're definitely taking the home in its current condition, because you don't have an inspection contingency. You have no ability to change anything about the home.
Yeah.
And you talked about how people were doing, like, that's been done, right, during COVID, or if it's a very competitive market, that's something that could happen. So let's talk about what could that mean for a buyer if they really want this home and they're willing to go that route. What are they getting themselves into?
Well, I think they need to understand what they're essentially saying by doing that. And what they are saying is, I want this house no matter what. Like, I hopefully am not going to terminate for any reason, because I guess besides title, which, you do get to review and make sure it's marketable after.
Well, in this scenario, do we even have a title contingency?
I mean, I guess not. So if there's literally nothing, then what you're telling that seller is, I'm going to buy this house no matter what. For a seller, it's probably the most attractive offer you can get.
Other than a check.
Other than a straight cash check. But in doing so, I think it's all of the prep work that leads to that offer that allows gives the buyer the confidence to do that, and I call it just risk mitigation. So it's talking about the hopefully buyer procured pre-inspection or the home inspection the seller provided. It's talking with the lender. It's looking at the data in the market of what's the purchase price that they're going in at. Another factor too is, like, how much money are you putting for earnest money? If you have $1,000 at risk, that could be a lot to some and a little for others. I don't know.
Yeah.
But if you have $1,000 in earnest money versus $50, like, that's I might be pretty nervous to go all in with $50,000 earnest money and not have a single contingency, unless I absolutely have to do that to win the house. But that just that comes down to how badly does somebody want something.
Yeah, I've definitely never seen anybody waive all contingencies before. I would not recommend it. It's very risky, but some people have.
I have one.
I haven't had a client, thankfully, but
2 months ago, it was no contingencies, none, and earnest money was a good chunk. It was like $75,000, and it was released non-refundable to the seller 2 days after mutual acceptance, which is a whole nother thing, which I really don't recommend doing that. But they had to. It was like their fourth offer. This was the house. They wanted it. We did our risk mitigation. They understood what the risks were, but they were really strong buyers, so it was going to be a good contract period. But they had to do that to win.
Well, here's a curveball. What if the seller never signs the closing documents? The $75,000 worth of earnest money has already been released to them.
That was the risk. That was the risk.
You're gonna have to go to court for that, but
that's a whole different conversation.
There's a whole nother expense.
Yeah. So it has happened to me recently, and I think in part it's dependent upon location, where we're at with the market, the type of property, right? If it's like ultra super desirable, amazing house, perfect location, the market's just right for it, then you might have to. But I always say this too. Just because somebody else is willing to do something does not mean you need to do it either.
Exactly.
Like this
Yeah.
isn't a game.
Yeah.
Like this is real life. This is important. Contracts are important. Contingencies are important. So, I think people get to places differently throughout their real estate journey. So make sure you do what feels comfortable
Mm-hmm.
and what feels right to you, and you will be successful at some point, whether if it's competitive or just in general of getting your offer accepted and having a contract work out. Don't do things just because you hear it on the news and everybody's going crazy and they're doing this,
Yeah.
that, and the other. Like, stick with your plan. Your plan will get you there at some point.
Yep.
Good.
The home sale contingency.
Oh.
Oh,
I mean, that's a whole nother 30-minute conversation on that one alone.
like purchasing with your property contingent upon selling.
Yeah.
I haven't done one of those before.
Nobody really talks about those, and those ones are like, they're coming back. I mean, they were non-existent during COVID. I mean,
Right.
with so many offers, sellers would be like,
No
I
way.
don't need that.
That's
But
what
now
happened to
we're
our
starting
house.
to see a lot of them now, and you're basically just bringing in now. In order for you to close on your purchase, you've got to sell your house. Now 2 transactions have to close.
Like 3 different parties.
The coordination of all of that. And the biggest one that is just always forgotten is if I'm selling my house to buy your house,
Mm-hmm.
what's the moving timeline look like? How do I get my stuff into your house in order for them to close and get their stuff into my house?
It's complicated.
That whole coordination is a really tricky one, and you've got to think about it. If again I'm the buyer and I want to buy your house and I need to sell mine, I need to think of all of that before I even write you the first offer.
Mm-hmm.
I need to figure out, because according to the contract, we're going to close on the sale of my house 3 days before the sale on the purchase on your house.
Mm-hmm.
Where do I live for 3 days?
Yeah.
Where does my stuff go?
Do I have a rent back for 3 days?
Right.
Like,
So
can they do that? Who's buying my house? Who then I'm buying?
it's a whole thing.
Would-
I don't even know the word I'm looking for, the metaphor.
It is a whole thing. It's a process.
But, and so before I write you that very first offer, I need to think of that. What am I doing with my stuff and my body, right? For those
literally.
3 days. Do I need to work in the contract where it's going to be a simultaneous close where I close on the purchase and my sale at the same time? But then again, that's great. When do I get the keys to my purchase? Can I get my stuff from house A to house B in less than a day so they can move into this house? So, it's a whole coordination, and it's always very difficult. People think of it halfway through the transaction like, uh-oh,
Yeah.
I just got my house under contract. I forgot about the 3-day window difference. Now, hey, seller, can I come in early?
Yeah.
No. Hey, buyer, can I stay late? No.
Yeah. What do I do?
Mini storage. Well,
Right.
they're hard to come by.
Yeah.
Friends and family, maybe, I don't
It
know,
could be hard
but
to apply to.
so that's one contingency. I think that is the most. I think that was the most difficult.
Yeah.
Because of just there's so many moving pieces.
You're right.
I've had a transaction where there were 3 houses that had to sell in order for the first one to sell. It was just a whole chain reaction. That's what I was looking for earlier. Chain reaction.
Chain reaction.
Found it.
4 different properties
It was crazy, and so just the coordination of all of that is elevates the stress level,
For sure.
for buyers and sellers.
Yeah, you got different agents involved and buyers and sellers, and it
Yeah.
can be. Would you? I mean, if possible for a buyer that is also selling, would you say it's easier to purchase your new home and then list your current one or the one you?
Yeah, in the ideal world, on paper, that you can
If it
afford both
pencils
loans.
out, right.
Yeah, for sure. The best way to do it, if possible, would be
Right.
close on the purchase, move in, get your house ready for sale, work with your realtor, do whatever you need to do to get that ready for sale, then sell that.
Right.
But that means you're floating 2 mortgages for however long.
And there's still a risk with that too, because there's no guarantee your house is going to sell in 7 days, 15. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. We can go off data, but we can't. I think life would be super easy in real estate if we could control the market and what other people do. Alas, we can't.
Yeah.
But yeah, that I have not done one where it's contingent upon the buyer's sale of their property.
Mm-hmm.
But I know when we bought our house a couple of years ago, our house got 3 offers that were contingent upon the sale of those buyers,
Mm-hmm.
and they declined all 3 of those.
Yeah.
And then we just, so yeah, it's as a seller, you don't love seeing that offer come in.
No, you don't.
Because you can't control anything to do with their transaction.
Right.
And who's looking at that? And are they in
Yeah.
the same state? Are they in...
But we're
Iowa?
starting to see them come back now since, the major craze of the COVID rush and everything
Mm-hmm.
that happened there with the interest rates in the 2s and 3s and everybody was buying. So since that's dwindled a little bit, I mean, I'm working on one right now where we're the seller and our buyers, we accepted their contingent offer, contingent upon them selling their house. And, you just gotta, the communication levels just obviously have to be heightened that much more between, agent and client.
Right.
And communication with the other agents involved with the other sale.
Yeah.
Because, my seller, you're my seller, you're just as interested in that house closing as you are your house closing.
100%.
So making sure everybody is always updated and is tough. So where do you stand, Mr. Nelson Taylor? Where do you stand on, you have the seller,
Mm-hmm.
I have the buyer, we're contingent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I need to move my stuff into your house 3 days before closing to help facilitate the other buyer moving in. Where are you on allowing buyers to move in prior to closing?
I mean, it's scary, because in theory, they could move in and the deal doesn't go through. And now they're in your house.
Squatting.
Now, the odds of that happening are low, probably, right? But I think when you're navigating a seller through a transaction, and same thing with the buyer, you kind of need to be, I don't want to say controlling the whole situation, but you need to understand the parties that you're dealing with, and try to get a sense of who they are as people and how they're going about, this contract, this business, this period, right? I like to try and see the best in people, so I would hope that would work out, and I call it the pot of goodwill. Yeah. When I talk to my clients, we start a transaction, I'm like, let's try and fill the pot of goodwill as much as possible in case we need to draw from that throughout this contract period. We've shown the other party that we're willing to cooperate and work on different things. In that case, maybe that's a pot of goodwill situation where we'd be allowing a buyer that's buying the property to draw from that and do it, but you gotta trust them, and that is hard.
And everybody's goal, obviously, is to close every transaction. Right. The buyer that moves in early doesn't want to not sell their house, not live there, and just squat in yours.
It's not some long scheme.
But it's possible, and that's where we have to make sure to talk about that.
That's the risk mitigation. It's the same thing we're talking about if you're writing offers without contingencies. It's like, well, how do we mitigate risk as much as possible? That's one that is pretty challenging if that ask comes across, and I think our job is not to make decisions for people. We don't do that.
No.
We provide every single possible scenario with all the information possible for every potential outcome, and work through their decision based off of that. Now, what I will say, what we will do is tell people if they're making a decision that is detrimental to their safety, to their financial health, to their physical health. We'll call that out and be like, I don't think that's a good choice.
Yeah.
But people are adults; they make their own decisions, and I think we have to try and facilitate the knowledge and sharing of information to allow folks to make the decision that is best for themselves, for their family, for whatever their goals are. But I'm not afraid to tell someone if they're making a bad decision, because that's our job,
Yeah.
and support them when they make good decisions. But I don't know, that's a tough situation. I think it'd be dependent upon who the buyer is and kind of how things have gone.
Yeah, it's definitely really hard, but understanding who they are, where they're coming from, are they selling a house out of state and moving here and need to move in early? That's why is that happening? So just kind of getting all your information. Like you say, that's what we're here for, is to relay all the information, outline potential hazards along the way, possibilities, and then you, client, tell us your decision.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's a good question.